All right, today we're doing 5.3, which is on factoring. And so our purpose statement is to be able to explain and describe how to solve quadratic functions by factoring an equation. And our vocab for today is we should know what the zero of a function is and what the roots of a function are. So a zero of a function. The zero of a function is a value for x that makes f of x equal to 0. So if I have like 4x squared minus 3x plus 7, the zeros are the values of x that will make that a true statement, make it equal to 0. Which means if we end up like, let's say it was, when I put in 3 I got out 0. That's not the case, but it's an example. That would mean that when I go to my graph, that graph is going to cross at 3, 0. And it's going to cross 0 at another point out here. And so those are also the x-intercepts of the function, where it crosses the x-axis. So all we need to understand here is that the zeros simply mean the values that make of x that make y equal to 0, or the function equal to 0, and they're also the x-intercepts of the graph. So we're going to find the zeros by graphing. This will be the example you'll do on your half sheet, and we'll come back and do that later on. But the first thing we do is we find the vertex. So let's just do, let's go x squared minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. And so we're going to find the zeros. And so to do that, you find the vertex, which is what we did on 5.2. And remember, to find the x value of the vertex, you do negative b over 2a. So remember, since there's no number in front of a, it's considered to be a 1. B is the number multiplied by x, so that's negative 4. And c is the constant by itself, which would be negative 12. So the opposite of b is a negative 4, so that would become positive 4. Divided by 2 times 1, which would be 2. And so my x value of the vertex is going to be 4 divided by 2, which is 2. Now we have to find the y value. So what we're going to do is we're just going to plug in the numbers. So 2 squared is 4. 2 times negative 4 is a negative 8, or 4 minus 8, minus 12. So 4 minus 8 is a negative 4, minus 12 is a negative 16. And so I know that this crosses my vertexes at 2 and negative 16. So to do this by graphing, we're going to make a chart like we did for graphing before. And so let's make that right here. So remember, we started our vertex, which is 2, negative 16. And one thing I would advise that you check, know where your vertex is. So this is below the y-axis, and because a is positive, it opens up. So we know we're going to have 2 zeros. We just have to find them. So you can go either direction. I'm going to go down first. When I put in 1 squared is 1. 4 times 1 is 4, so minus 4. So 1 minus 4 is negative 3, minus 12 is a negative 15. So when we put in 0, we know what we get. We get negative 12. And so we just have to continue going up or down until we find a 0. So we plug in negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. Negative 4 times 1 is a positive 4, minus 12. So we get 5 minus 12 would be a negative 7. Continue on. Negative 2. Negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 2 times 4 is 8. 4 plus 8 is 12, minus 12 is 0. And so we found one of our answers. One of our answers is -2, because we get 0 out there. Now, you could fill in the chart the other way, but remember, it's symmetrical. So our vertex was right here. There's our vertex. So we went down 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to -2. So we go up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means 6 is going to be 0. So we now have our answers. Our answers are -2 and +6. Now I will tell you, the book, you can't use parentheses, because remember, parentheses is an ordered pair for x, y. This is a solution set. The book will use these really nice brackets like that. Okay, and put the numbers in, -2 and 6. And it's fine to do that, but I just make squiggly lines. Same thing. It's just telling you the answers that make x equal to 0 are -2 and +6. You just can't use parentheses. So let's go through this problem that we have here. So now as we do this one, again I'm going to put my values. A is 2, B is 16, and C is 24. And so we do the opposite of B. So -16 divided by 2 times 2, which is 4. And so our x value is -4. So I'm going to plug -4 in. -4 squared is 16. 16 times 2 is 32. -4 times 16 is a -64. Plus 32. Or excuse me, plus 24. And so we get -32 plus 24 is a -8. Again, I can go either way. I'm going to go up this time. So I'm going to plug in -3. -3 squared is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. -3 times 16 is a -48. 18 minus 48 is a -30. Plus 24 is a -6. So now let's try -2. -2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. -2 times 16 is a -32. 8 minus 32 is a -24. Plus 24 is 0. So we went up 2 to go to 0. So we go down 2. And so my solution would be -6 and -2. So that's how you find the zeros, by graphing. And so we get, again, it doesn't make a difference what order you put those in, just don't use parentheses. Now the problem with graphing is, it works fine here when we get whole numbers, but sometimes you get fractions, and then you have to guess and check till you get the number, and it can be very difficult for some problems. So we have to find a way to do it when we're not graphing. So, the other term, zero product property. This is pretty common sense. If A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. The only way you can get 0 when you multiply two numbers together is if one of them is 0. So we're going to use that, because what we can do is if we take something and factor it into two things multiplied together, and we know it's equal to 0, then we know either this equals 0 or that has to equal 0. One of those two has to occur. So if I can break an equation down into things that are multiplied together, then we can set them equal to 0 and solve those individual parts, which helps us when we get to fractional answers. So, to go over that. First of all, I missed this. Roots Roots, it says roots are the values that make the equation true. So what people get confused on this is, they say, well, what's the difference between roots and zeros? Because these are also what make it equal to 0. The difference is, these are just real numbers. If we go back to the zeros are what makes it equal to 0, and those are real numbered solutions. Later on in this chapter, we're going to come up with imaginary answers that work, and those will be the roots. So the roots include the x-intercepts or the zeros, but they also include any imaginary solutions we'll have. So you'll see that term in the book. It doesn't really make any difference when solving today's work, but when we get to imaginary numbers, it will make a big difference. So we're going to solve by factoring. Now, most of you learn to factor by doing what most of the teachers are calling the X method. So I want to go through how to do that. And again, this is example 2, which we'll go through after we go through some other examples. So I want to take you through, first of all, a problem that will involve every step as we go through. So the X method. And let's do this problem. 6x squared plus 2x minus 20 equals 0. So we're going to find the zeros of this. All right? So the steps are, write the expression from highest to lowest power of one of the variables. So what this is talking about here is we always want it to be in standard form. X squared, x, and then the constant. Example would be, what if this would have been written like this? The first thing I would want to do is change it to that form. Okay, so we want the highest power first down to the constant. So that would be step 1. Step 2 is you should always check for greatest common factor. It makes the process easier, it makes you work with smaller numbers, and just makes your work in general a lot easier. So we're going to go to here, and we're going to look for greatest common factor. So we have a 6, a 2, and a 20. So 2 goes into all of those. So we're just going to pull a 2 out front. And then we put inside what we need to do to get back to this. So we divide each of those by 2, and we get 3x squared plus x minus 10 equals 0. So we've just pulled out the greatest common factor. That's step 2. Step 3. We're going to do the X method. Now when you do the X method, we draw the X. On top we put A times C, and on bottom we put what B is. Then what we're going to fill in these circles here, now you won't put the circles when you do it, I'm just doing that for the definition. You fill in the circles with the factors of A and C that have a sum equal to B. So let's go through this problem. Again, we're now working with this right here. We're doing 3x squared plus x minus 10 equals 0. We don't have to worry about the 2, because even though the 2 is multiplied to this, since there's no variable with it, it can't be equal to 0. It's just a number. So now we're working with this. So I'm going to make the x here. And we take the factors of a times c. So remember, a, b, and c. 3 times negative 10 is negative 30. And b is the number multiplied to x. Since there is no number written there, it's a 1. So again, this is our a times c. This is our b. Now we have to fill these spaces into the side with the factors of negative 30 that add up to 1. Now what you have to understand is some of you will be able to look at that and immediately know what it is. Some of you need to list the factors out in groups so you can do it. So I would just always start, if I'm listing the factors, with 1 and 30. Now remember, one of these is going to be negative, but I wouldn't worry about that until you get the factors written out. So the next number that goes in is 2, and it goes in 15 times. 3 goes in 10 times. 4 doesn't go in, but 5 goes in 6 times. Now, since we've got 6 here, we've already started, so we've got all the factors listed. So we have 4 to check. Well, remember, we want them to add up to 1. And we know, because this is a negative 30, one of the numbers in each set has to be negative. So since it adds up to 1, you just have to find numbers that are 1 apart, which would be 5 and 6. Then you have to ask yourself, which one has to be negative? Well, if I made the 6 negative, that would be negative 6 plus 5, which would be a negative 1. So it has to be a negative 5. So you fill these in. Excuse me, it's a positive 6. You fill those in on the sides, and it doesn't make any difference which side you put them on. So we finished step 2. We factored out the greatest common factor. Let's go to the next step. So step 4. If a equals 1, then you have the factors of the expression. It would just be x minus 5 and x plus 6. But that's only if x equals 1. And if you remember back to our problem, our a was equal to 1. Our a is equal to 3. And so we can't use step 4. We have to skip that and go to step 5. And that is, if a is not equal to 1, then you must fill out the box. Now, I've labeled this box here. This is the first square in the box, second square, third, and then the fourth. If we go back, I'm going to rewrite that expression so you can see it. It was 3x squared plus x minus 30? Right? No, minus 10. So, as we do this, I'm going to go ahead and build the box over here. So make a big square, break it up into 4 boxes. Remember, the first box contains your first term. So that's where the 3x squared goes. Okay? The last box, the last term goes in the fourth box. So the last term goes in the last box. Then you take your numbers from the circles or from the sides of your x and they fill in both of those. And here's where you have to be careful. This is negative 5 and 6. It doesn't make any difference where you put those. I could put the 6 there and the negative 5 there. That wouldn't make a difference. But you have to remember those. You're always going to add the variable to both of those. So we filled out the box. Once we have the box filled out, you factor each row, these are my rows, and each column, these are my columns, by pulling out the greatest common factor. So you look at this and say, are there any numbers that go into 3 or negative 5? 1, but that doesn't help us. But this has an x squared and this has an x, so I can pull an x out of those. Here, I have a 6x and a negative 10. The number that goes into both those is 2. And now, the sign between these is always the sign of the front box. So this is positive, so that's x plus 2. The first box in your row gives you your sign. Now we go this way. 3 and 6, I can pull a 3 out, and I can pull an x out. And here I can pull a 5 out of both. And then since my first box is negative, that's a negative. And so my factors are x plus 2 and 3x minus 5 equals 0. So I have factored that. Now, step 7, I always recommend that you check by multiplying. Because if I've made a mistake in here, this won't multiply together to give me my original equation. So I'm going to check this. Most of you have learned the FOIL method, first, outer, inner, last. I just do double distributive, or some people call it the claw method. You take x times both and 2 times both, because this kind of forms a claw or a crescent moon, some people call it. Anyway, it's the same as the FOIL. So let's check it. X times 3x. 3x squared, I'm good there. I get a negative 5x and a plus 6x, which adds up to 1x, so that's good. And 2 and negative 5 is negative 10. So now I know I haven't made a mistake, because sometimes people will, get the signs backwards, or they'll forget to pull out the greatest common factor, and then that will make a mistake in your answer. So I just advise checking it so you know your answer is going to be right when you get there. And then the last step is set each factor equal to 0 and solve, because this is the zero product property. If A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. Well, we have the same thing here. We have two quantities multiplied together to give me 0. So that means either x plus 2 equals 0 or 3x minus 5 equals 0. And so now you just solve for x. So I subtract 2, and so I get x equals negative 2. Over here, I add 5. So I get 3x equals 5. Then I divide by 3. And I get or x equals 5/3. Now, the book will sometimes leave it that way. I'd prefer if you wrote your answers negative 2 and 5/3. All right? So we found the answer. I'm going to also show there's a shortcut to solving these. It's not real short, but for some of you, you'll like this. All you have to do is take the opposite of this and the number and divide it by the number in front of the variable. So opposite 2 is negative 2 divided by 1 is negative 2. Not a big deal here, but it's kind of nice here. The opposite of negative 5 is 5 divided by 3, 5/3. And that will always work for a little shortcut for solving. So let's do another one. Now, I tried to give you one there that involved most of the steps. Let's take one that's a little bit less complicated. X squared plus 12x minus 45 equals 0. Okay? So, our first step. Is it from highest to lowest power? Yes. X squared, x constant. So that I don't have to do that. Is there a greatest common factor? 1, 12, and negative 45, only 1. That doesn't help. So now we fill out our x. Negative 45 times 1 is negative 45. B is 12. And so we need to find the factors of 45 that add up to, or negative 45 that add up to 12. So we go 1 and 45, 3 and 15, 5 and 9. Okay? So, they need, since 1's negative, they have to be 12 apart, so that would be this one. It has to be a positive 12, so that means the 3 is negative. So we get negative 3 and positive 15. So we found our values. If A is equal to 1, then you have your factors. So I've got my factors. My factors are x minus 3 and x plus 15. So I can now skip step 5. I don't need to do that. I didn't need to build the box because A was 1. We don't need to factor because we've already got that, so we can go down and check it. X times x, x squared, that checks. Negative 3 times 15, negative 45, that checks. 15 and negative 3, positive 12, that checks. So now, again, you can set it equal to 0. And solve that, or you can just remember the shortcut. Opposite negative 3 divided by 1 is 3. Opposite 15 is negative 15 divided by 1 is negative 15. And I have my answers. So we have that factor. Let's do another one. So we have 3x minus 90 plus 3x squared equals 0. Okay? So remember, First thing we want to do, highest to lowest power. Well, my x squared is not first, so I want to rewrite this. So 3x squared plus 3x minus 90 equals 0. Factor out the greatest common factor. Well, 3 goes into all those, so I can pull a 3 out. X squared plus x minus 30 equals 0. Build my x. So I don't worry about this 3 anymore. It's gone. So 1 times negative 30 is negative 30. 1. So again, I need numbers that multiply together to give me negative 30 and add up to 1. So again, you don't have to make the list. You probably know that that's 5 and 6. And the 5 has to be negative. Again, because our a now is 1, we don't go back to here. We go back to what we're working with. Our a is 1. So our answer, our factor form is x minus 5, x plus 6. And so my answer is the opposite of that, 5, and the opposite of that, negative 6. Again, if you're not comfortable with the shortcut, set it equal to 0. And solve. Add 5. Subtract 6. And we're done. So let's go back and do the problem you need to do for the half sheet. So we're going to do this problem here. 6x squared plus 7x minus 20. So, is it highest to lowest power? X squared, x, constant. Yes. Is there a greatest common factor? No number is going to 6, 7, and 20. So we're going to be, right now, working with this problem. Okay? So we have to build our x. Negative 127. And so now we have, this is a bigger problem, so we list the factors of 120. So I'm just going to start with 120, 260, 340, 430. Those are 24 apart. 5, 24, they're 19 apart. 6, 20, those are 14 apart. 7 doesn't go in, 8 goes in 15 times. Those are 7 apart. We want it to be a positive 7, so that means the 8 is negative. So it's negative 8 and positive 15. So we've built our x. Now, because our first term is not 1, we have to build the box. First box has the first term. 6x squared, last box gets the last term, negative 20, and then again, doesn't make any difference the order. I'm going to go 15x and negative 8x. Remember to put the x with those. Now we pull out, we factor those. 6 and 15 is a 3x. 8 and 20 would be 4. Minus. Here, 6 and 8 would be 2x. And 15 and 20 would be 5, and your first box is positive. So we get for our factors 3x minus 4, 2x plus 5. Now it doesn't make any difference what order you put those in. You could have the 2x plus 5 first and the 3x minus 4 second. But let's check it and make sure we're okay. 3x times 2x is 6x squared. Negative 4 and 5 is negative 20. 15x and negative 8x is 7x. So I know I'm right. Again, you can set them equal to 0 and solve. You know how to solve those for 0, but again, the shortcut is simply opposite this divided by the number in front. So 4/3, opposite this, negative 5, number in front 2, and we're done. We have negative 5/2. So, That's the second thing you're going to have to do in the assignment. I have another set of steps to factor. I'm going to skip that since most of the students seem to be doing this by the X method. This is just how I used to factor. So we'll skip that and go down to the last thing you have to do on this assignment, which is the easiest part. So for example number 3 on your half sheet, they're going to ask you to write a quadratic function in standard form for the given set of zeros, negative 3 and 5. So to write a function given the zeros, so if they tell you if x equals a or x equals b, then x minus a times x minus b equals 0, and then you multiply the factors to get your new function. So if negative 2, let's go 4. All you do, we want this to, negative 2 to be the answer, so that would be x plus 2. This is where the shortcut, if you understand, it's pretty easy. It's just the opposite of what it says. So x plus 2, opposite 4, x minus 4, because if I put 4, it's what I put in here that makes it equal to 0. So 4 minus 4 would be 0. And then you just FOIL this, claw, double distribute, whatever you do to solve those. X times x is x squared. X times negative 4 is negative 4x. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. And then we add like terms. So x squared minus 2x minus 8 equals 0 would be our equation. Now, they can make this harder by adding fractions in. If they did this to you, negative 3 halves and positive 4 fifths, you can do it the same way. It's just x plus 3 halves and x minus 4 fifths. But when you multiply this, you're going to get a lot of fractions. So you can avoid that by understanding the shortcut. Remember, our shortcut said if we had 2x minus 5, it was the opposite of this, divided by that. Well, the same thing. This means the bottom number, what I'm dividing by, is multiplied to the x, so 2x, and then the opposite of minus 3 is plus 3. The opposite of, or the 5 is multiplied to the x, and the opposite of 4 is negative 4. And now I can multiply this, so 10x squared minus 8x plus 15x minus 20 and I avoided the fractions. So it's fine to do it this way. The answer will look a little bit different, but if you multiply by the common denominator of your fractions up here, you will get this. So let's do the one you have to do for your worksheet. Example number 3. So if it's a negative 3, it becomes x plus 3. If it's a positive 5, it becomes x minus 5. You multiply that together, x times x, x squared, x times negative 5, negative 5x, 3x, and 3 times negative 5, negative 15. So we get x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals 0, and we have our function, or equation. So your assignment, page 338, 19 to 45 the odds, and 49 to 59 the odds. Understand, this is going to be a little tricky. Factoring is not the easiest thing. We're going to spend another day working on this, but hopefully this will give you a good start on it. Make sure you follow the steps, take it step by step, and that way at least you can come in and say, hey, I don't know how to do this certain step, and don't get lost on it. So, good luck on that.